Hey, this is Mary from the Daily Sew. In continuing our series on hand stitches and sewing by hand, I will show and explain a stitch that's great for sewing seams and for repairing any broken seams, a variation on that stitch, and the absolutely best stitch you can use for putting in a center back zipper. It's practically invisible. It beats putting it in by machine every time, and it doesn't take that long. So if you're ready, let's go. Let's briefly talk about needles and thread. Needles come in different types and sizes, and the size you need depends on the fabric you're sewing. Thick or tougher fabric like denim or canvas would require a bigger needle, and thinner, lighter weight fabrics would require a smaller needle. The correct size needle will give you better control over your stitches. Cut your thread about 18 to 22 inches long. Longer lengths of thread will likely tangle and knot on themselves. If you have a long seam to sew, just plan on having to rethread your needle. You could of course try longer length, but then that's on you. The end of the thread that comes off the spool first is the end that you want to put through the eye of the needle, because thread has a nap or a direction to it, like your pet's fur. If you run your fingers down the length of the thread in one direction, it's sort of smooth. If you run your fingers down the length of the thread in the opposite direction, the fibers will raise up off the thread, and you can feel that. You want to stitch with the thread going down into the fabric in the smoother direction. You don't want the fibers raising up every time you put that thread down into your fabric, because that will cause tangles. And believe me, the thread really does knot on itself. So here is an easy knot to make. You take the tail end of your thread and you wrap it around the index finger on your non-dominant hand. Once or twice is fine. Then with your thumb, roll those threads off and pull. Kind of have to hold the knot. It's not always pretty, but it's a good knot to use, and you're going to hide the knot anyway. When you sew, you're going to sew right to left if you're right-handed, and left to right if you're left-handed. Just remember, it's your dominant hand towards your non-dominant hand. Some stitches are worked in the opposite direction, and instructions will tell you, but almost always it's your right to left if you're right-handed, left to right if you're left-handed. All right, let's learn the back stitch. The back stitch is a really strong stitch and can take a lot of strain or pulling. It's a great stitch to know. You'll come up from the back, and even though you're working the line of stitches from right to left, your first stitch is going to go backwards. So stick that needle in one stitch length to the right of where you came up out of the back, and then you go across the back 2 full stitch lengths. That's the first stitch. Now all the other stitches are going to go down where the last stitch just ended. So 1 stitch to the right or backwards across the top of the fabric, and 2 stitches to the left across the back. So you go 1 back, 2 forward, 1 back on the top, 2 forward across the back. Now you want to watch your tension when you're pulling that thread. If you pull it too tight, your fabric is going to pull and strain, have little puckers. If you don't pull the thread tight enough, you'll have loops on your fabric. Now this is an exaggerated loop, but you'll still have little loops. You want the thread to lie nice and flat on your fabric. Not too tight, not too loose. Because the back stitch is such a strong hand stitch, it's especially good for mending or sewing any seam that's going to get a lot of strain, like underarm seam, maybe where the sewing machine cannot get to when you repair, or an inseam of a pair of pants. This is a great stitch. Now here's a good ending knot. take your thread to the back and just pick up, make a little stitch. Pick up a couple threads or make a tiny stitch. Except, don't pull that thread all the way. You're just gonna leave that loop as if you didn't pull your thread tight enough, and that just makes a loop automatically. And then you'll put the needle and thread through that loop. So you actually end up with 2 little loops, but that's only because you didn't pull tight. So I get those loops a little down closer to the fabric, then hold on to them and pull on the thread. Makes a nice knot. It's really secure. It's easy to do. The next stitch is the half back stitch. It's a variation on the back stitch, and it's very similar. This is good for sewing any seam. It's pretty strong. So come up from the back, and again go down backwards. But you only go back 1/2 of a stitch. So if the stitch length is supposed to be 1/8 of an inch, this you go back 1/16 of an inch. My stitches are rather generous in size, but you get the idea. Go across the top, backwards 1/2 of a stitch, and across the back 1.5 stitches. So again, you're going over 1 full stitch length from where the thread is coming out of the fabric. Go back 1/2 on the top and over 1.5 across the back of the fabric. Half back and over 1.5. Half back over 1.5. And again, let's look at that knot. Pick up a couple of threads or make a small stitch, but don't pull the thread tight. Just leave a little loop and stick your needle and thread through that loop. And you hold on, you keep holding on to that loop you've made, and you pull. Boom, boom, done. Nice knot. Clip it. Clip it. Let's go. The last stitch is the prick stitch. This is a wonderful stitch for setting in zippers. When your zipper is center back, your stitches are really obvious. And when you do it by machine, you have these 2 rows of stitches going down each side of the zipper. So you really want those stitches to be perfect. When I set zippers in by machine before, I've had to take some of my stitching out because it's not perfect and it's so obvious. So now I just use the prick stitch, which is practically invisible if you use a matching thread because the stitches are so small. But it's actually a really strong stitch because it's a variation on the back stitch. So again, you come up from the back like before, but this time you're going to go over only 1 or 2 threads of the fabric. And of course you go across the back 1 full length of stitch, which is 1/8 of an inch. It's supposed to be 1/8 of an inch. Again, you go back just 1 or 2 threads in the fabric, but you go across the back of the fabric a full stitch length, or 1/8 of an inch. And here I'm probably doing 1/4 of an inch. It's hard to believe, but this delicate looking stitch is actually really strong because on the back you do have those longer stitch lengths. And there's the back. You're still going over a lot across the back. On the top, you just go down to the right 1 or 2 threads, but a complete stitch to the left across the back of the fabric. You know when courtiers are putting in zippers, they're not using a sewing machine. They're using a prick stitch. So if you want to add a little luxury to your own garment, this is the stitch you want to use. And I think I said, but I find it goes really fast. I find it faster to put in a center back zipper by hand than by machine. So this is the back stitch. It looks a lot like machine stitching on the front, but double long loops on the back. And it's really strong. It's great for mending or just sewing seams that are going to get any kind of strain or pulling. So the back stitch, and then we did the half back stitch, which the front only goes back 1/2. On the back, of course, goes over the full amount. So again, it's strong like the back stitch. It's a great stitch for sewing. Half back stitch. And the prick stitch. This one you want for setting in zippers. It's very strong, but will be invisible if you use matching thread. Almost invisible. Again, strong enough for any pull and strain that a zipper would cause. And that is the prick stitch. So we have the back stitch, the half back stitch, and the prick stitch. All right, now you know. You know the back stitch, the half back stitch, and the prick stitch. They're all very handy hand stitches, haha, to know. So if you have any questions, please put them in the comments below and I will get back to you. We're also coming out with more videos on hand stitches, so be sure to subscribe so you don't miss them. Thank you so much for watching. Enjoy your sewing. Ciao.